great deal of internal struggle and challenge in her role as an interpreter. And if you could just tell us about that night and what you experienced and how you felt about your role as a professional interpreter being called into a situation where you were very, very worried about a person in custody who you saw was in quite a degree of danger.
It was about 4 years ago that night. I thought it was going to be an ordinary interpreting job at the Dandenong police station. I had done a lot of jobs with them for the last 6 years back then. I had no idea I was about to face the biggest challenge in my life, personally and morally.
Just explain what happened when you got there.
When I got there, I was told a gentleman had a sore in his pants. I was under the impression that a person was mucking around with the police. The interview took place outside the cell. Through the flap of the cell door, I first had a look. I saw a gentleman, Mr. Tang, was bleeding from his mouth. He was rolling on the floor from one side to another. He was yelling in pain. So automatically I had concern about this person, this Mr. Tang's welfare. But the interpreter's role is not to make comments about the situation. I was there to facilitate effective communication, to interpret for them. But I just felt something wasn't right. Throughout the night, no one offered Mr. Tang any help. No one asked whether he needed any medical attention. I guess I had a heightened sensation of unease when I saw Mr. Tang crawled out of that cell door on his paws. He was still bleeding from his mouth. So I had a great moment of sadness. I just had to keep interpreting. And then when he was forcibly removed from the police station, he was in such pain. He struggled to stand up, but they removed him. When they removed him with great force, he made this sharp sound. It just pierced through my heart. At that moment, I just froze. And that night became a terrible night for me too. I had asked the officers if he collapses outside the police station, would anyone call the ambulance? They said yes. So I was struggling so hard not to make a comment, because as interpreters we have to remain unbiased throughout the communication exchange between the participants in any interpreted encounter. So I had to remain utterly professional. It was very painful for me to stand there, saw what was happening in front of my eyes. Mr. Tang collapsed outside the police station, and I had my paperwork signed off, so my role as the interpreter of the night had finished. Finally, I thought I wasn't a prisoner of my own ethical boundaries. I rushed out, I went to him. He was lying in the puddle, he couldn't move. It was raining, it was very cold. He wasn't wearing shoes. So I decided to stay with him because at that point an ambulance was organised. So I knew the ambulance officer would need me. At that point I was just a citizen of society because I believe everyone has social responsibilities. And there was no way I would abandon a human being when he was hungry, thirsty, confused, and definitely in need of assistance. So I went to him. It was raining. He was terrible because his eyes started to roll up. My mum and dad are doctors. I grew up in hospitals. I have some medical knowledge. I knew he was in a lot of trouble. So I decided to keep talking to him, to talk to him so that he stayed awake with me. It's very important for someone who was suffering that much pain to stay awake. So I remember I opened up my umbrella, tried to shelter the first half of his body. Very small umbrella. And I tried to feel his pulse. It was very, very weak. And I just asked him, Usually we're not supposed to have any private conversation with clients, but at that point I was just a citizen. So I asked him, why did you go back to your home? He said, I just wanted to see my daughter, she's 15. And that was the last words he said, and he just couldn't make any more sounds anymore. So I'm very glad that when someone's life, Mr. Chang's life, was slipping away, he wasn't alone. I was there with him. So
yeah, and in fact, one of the, if anybody's seen the footage on YouTube, the thing that absolutely struck me was that there's a number of police standing around, and then we see Yu Lipski. She's holding the umbrella over this man who's on the ground dying, and she runs across the car park to her car, gets a bottle of water from her car, and runs back with that water and feeds him water. And it's just, it was astounding and extraordinary. And you were there with him, and very sad story because, of course, he wasn't meant to go to his wife's house. She had an intervention order against him. He was, if you see the footage, he's obviously a severe alcoholic. He could hardly walk. He'd gone there because he wanted to see his daughter. Of course, the police come and take him to the police station, and there's a number of issues about what we do with people who are alcoholics and who are taken away in the police station and put in their cells for 4 hours, or whether that's the best way to treat alcoholics. But Yu Lipski, if you hadn't come forward, I'm not quite sure that this story would have ever been told, and that's why I think you're one of the most wonderful Voltaire Award winners we've ever had. Tell us a little bit more about your family background. You're here with your lovely parents who I've met, and your gorgeous daughters Jade and Jasmine. And your parents were doctors in China before migrating to Australia. How did you come to be in Australia? Tell us about your story.
my parents, my dad, oh, he's crying. Oh, he's 80. My dad, when he was 15, without his consent, he was taken to North Korea to be trained as an army doctor. At the age of 15, he was thrown into this war. He just continued. He just learned to become a wonderful doctor. He finished later on, finished his tertiary degree. Oh, became a general doctor, a surgeon, a senior consultant, and then an associate professor.
Wow.
He was prosecuted during the Cultural Revolution for speaking out. He's always been very outspoken.
Another outspoken person. Another person speaking up and speaking out.
And my mom had to work very, very hard to ensure Dad's release. So he was put under as a house arrest 3 times. Yeah. And my mom, she was born in 1949 when we were an era women enjoyed very low social status. She lost her dad before she turned 1, but my grandmother realized the importance of education. So my mom, she had to work from the age of 7 to pay for her education, for her tuition fees. She later on, also, she just pushed on, she just showed great strength and tenacity. She became a doctor, an ophthalmologist, a senior consultant, and also an associate professor. So very proud of my parents.
So
after the event, I struggled for the first 2 weeks. The information I had, to do something or not to do anything about it, the easiest thing to do is just to
turn away, because I suppose not only is that sometimes culturally easier to do, but also there's your family, what will they think, and I understand that the first time you spoke out was on 3AW and your husband just happened to be tuned into the radio at that time and heard his wife weeping on the radio.
I couldn't tell him he's the most amazing husband on the planet. He's just so lovely. I didn't want to, because of the confidentiality, I couldn't share that with him. So I just kept everything inside for that terrible But eventually I found the strength to tell what happened that night. Partly also because my parents-in-law, they came to Australia in 1982 as political refugees with 3 children, 2 suitcases, 50 bucks and determination to make a better life for the kids.
So the Lipskis are from Poland?
From Poland, that's right.
Political refugees from Poland?
Political refugees.
Yes.
And my father-in-law, Dr. Voltaire Lipski, and my mother-in-law, beautiful Jadwiga Lipska, they came with no English at all. Later on, my father-in-law, he just held senior positions in cross multinational engineering companies. My mother-in-law, no English at all. Later on, she taught VCE science and specialist maths at a Catholic school for 18 years. And my husband, he's a senior trade specialist. His brother, also a very senior person within the multinational oil company. And a beautiful sister-in-law, Ivana Lipski, a senior sonographer, an ultrasound specialist.
Welcome to the Lipskis as well.
I found strength to tell the story because I had the risk of losing my job. I didn't know how my agency would react. That's how when I called Justin Smith, I was so afraid, and Justin just encouraged me to go ahead. And I heard trust and courage in his voice. I just decided to go ahead with the radio interview.
What about when you told your friends and you had to go to the coroner's court and give evidence? Were they supportive of you, or how did all that go?
People in my community, Chinese people, they are still very much afraid of dealing with authority because of the historical influences. If you heard such thing called the proletarian cultural revolution, commonly known as the Cultural Revolution, which is the social-political movement that took place in China from 1966, that long ago, until 1976, set into motion by Mao Zedong, then chairman of the Communist Party. Its stated goal was to enforce communism by removing capitalist, traditional and cultural elements from Chinese society.
Your mother wasn't even allowed to learn English. He wanted to learn English, and he was told he could only learn Russian. That's
right. And he secretly listened to the Voice of America. During that, millions of people were prosecuted in the violent factional struggles. It turned into factional struggles, and millions of people suffered a wide range of abuses, including public humiliation, arbitrary detention, imprisonment, torture, sustained harassment, and seizure of property. It was an absolute havoc, catastrophe, great calamity in the Chinese history. The emotional and the physical scars on people are still so painful and raw. It's a constant reminder what could happen to you if you choose to
That's why we need our civil liberties, everyone. And so were your friends coming along to the court to support you, or were they anxious about being involved with the authorities and courts and lawyers and so on?
A friend of mine, a social school friend of mine, she said, yeah, I'll go with you. When she found out later of what would happen, she immediately said, sorry, I'm busy. Some of friends did stay away from me, but my husband went, my beautiful sister-in-law went to support me. I'm very glad. But I don't blame my friends because they are scared. They made the decision, the best decision they could make in the circumstances because of what? Because of the fears. I don't blame them for staying away from me.
Most people do their best to stay out of courts, and it takes a lot of courage to come forward and know that you might end up in court, as you did in the end, and you were cross-examined, of course.
Yes.
We might just invite Justin Smith and Louise Milligan up to the stage if they wouldn't mind, because I'd like them to, or perhaps, come up. It might be easier if you come up. We just get their perspective on Yu's story, and it did get quite a lot of media at the time. And of course, journalists also have a very important role in communicating messages to the public about what's actually going on. First of all, Justin, you got the call from Yu Lipski.
Yeah.
Tell us, did you have trouble talking her into going on air at the time when she rang you? Because I think it was the first time she'd actually told anyone about the story.
Well, it was, and I could tell that when she started talking to me, it was the first time that she It doesn't surprise me to hear now that she hadn't talked to her family about it, because I felt that it was pouring out of her. And she did seem to be in shock about what had happened, but she was far from helpless. You know, it didn't, you know, it was bursting out of her. You knew that she had, you can tell these things about people, she had no agenda. The only agenda was the truth, and she wasn't trying to run anybody over, she wasn't trying to cause any trouble, she just had to let it out. And she knew, the other thing I think that she knew inside her, that if she didn't do it, the story wasn't going to get out. It wouldn't get told, and she was the only person that could do it. She recognised she was the only person that could do it. And she did it.
And Louise, you interviewed Yu Lipski for 7:30 Report, and one of the things that she said at the end of that, because as a result of all this story, there were some systemic changes that happened, I think. But one of the things that she said was she did what she had to do at the time, sheltering the man, helping him. And what worried her most was not systems problems, but just what she described as weakness in the human heart. She has a beautiful way with words. Do you agree?
That was what struck me so much. I sat through that coronial inquest and I watched that vision of poor Mr. Tung dying over and over again, because, you know, we had to edit it and we had to, you know...
And you had to fight to get it put on air, didn't you, to get the right to have it?
As we always do, which is another issue in this state. It's very much closed justice in this state, but anyway, that's another thing. But sitting through that, it was such a devastating, you know, grim story to cover. And then I met you at court, you know, I sort of asked her if she would be interested in talking to our show, and, you know, I actually didn't know that she would, because she had spoken to Neil Mitchell anonymously, and I thought I couldn't really blame her if she didn't sort of want to put her head on the chopping block, as it were, because, you know, she has to deal with the police all the time. But I mean,
that's part of the important part of the story, isn't it? That really, she was risking potentially losing her job, and also going back to police stations and getting a hard time, just getting the cold shoulder.
That's right, and I thought it was really great. I mean, because this brave woman came forward because she believes in the greater good, and that's always what she says. You know, every time I've spoken to her, it's about decency and human kindness and having a heart. Because she did that, Victoria Police, which is often into a bit of ass covering really, the Deputy Commissioner got up and said, "We did the wrong thing here," and he admitted that, and that was only because you came forward. No one would have known about this. These women who treated someone like a, you know, second-class human being would have got away with it. I mean, one of the things that really struck me in my interview with you was when she was talking about the way the police were speaking to Mr. Tang, and she had this moral quandary as an interpreter, because as an interpreter you're supposed to say exactly what the person is saying, but what the person was saying was so lacking in humanity that she had to sort of change it a bit. So they were saying, "Get up, get out," and you changed it to, "Can you get up, can you get out?" And I just thought that was just so showing her humanity, and that's why she's here tonight.
I think we sometimes underestimate the very important role of interpreters and translators in the justice system, and I don't know if you have any of your interpreter friends here tonight.
Yes, on the table.
All power to you. All power to you. I've been in courtrooms where you have an interpreter interpreting for a witness, and the interpreter literally gets shouted out of the courtroom because they're not good enough, they're not able to do it, and then you get a really good interpreter there, and they basically are the most important person in the room. So,
yeah. Can I just say something about our work? When we go out to work, we don't want to hear one thing, just interpret word for word. Interpret is not interpreting word for word. If language were nomenclature for a set of universal concepts, it would be easy to interpret. But each language articulates and organizes the word differently. So what is it interpreting is to no time to consult a colleague at all. The execution is to be as accurate as possible, the interpretation is to be cohesive and coherent. Very hard work. And in the criminal justice system, sometimes you barristers, you ask tricky questions. And we hate that because very often the language has a grammatical sequence which is unknown to Chinese, to the target language. So impossible to interpret. The linguistic challenge is not surmountable given that little time we have. So the effect in English will not be the same in Chinese or other language. So can you please just ask simple, straightforward questions?
Which I think means tinkling crystals in the wind or something beautiful like that. It's a very deserving award winner. And I do have somewhere, do we have a Voltaire Award so I can actually give it to her? Here it comes. And if everybody could please take the journalist as well, particularly